Now, the UN is warning that ignoring the plight of Sudan's refugees will have catastrophic consequences. More than 12 million people have been displaced as the country enters its third year of civil war. Diplomats from around the world are meeting in London at a conference seeking ways to end the conflict and provide more humanitarian relief. The UK and Germany have announced new funding for aid organisations active in the region. But neither of the warring parties is at the summit. Well, in his opening remarks, British Foreign Secretary David Lammy said the international community should not look away from the conflict.
Many have given up on Sudan. That is wrong. It's morally wrong when we see so many civilians beheaded, infants as young as 1 subjected to sexual violence, more people facing famine than anywhere else in the world. We simply cannot look away.
Jorge Moreira de Silva is Executive Director of the UN Office for Project Services and has just landed in Sudan. Welcome to DW. What are the most pressing issues you're hoping to address there?
Well, the UNOPS, as you know, is the UN agency for operations, for infrastructure, project management, and therefore I was very interested in my visit to understand the needs from the people, both in the short but also in the mid and long term. And clearly, as you said, and in the piece that was shared before this interview, we are dealing with the largest humanitarian crisis in the world, and therefore the idea that you need to get peace first and aid later, it's wrong. It won't work. We need peace. We need genuine dialogue among parties to get the deal, but we cannot delay action regarding the humanitarian aid, but also the preparation for early recovery and reconstruction. Today, I visit an internal displaced people center where I could see the immense needs from the people living in that center. For instance, it's a school for 800 girls during the day, but then you also have 250 IDPs, internal displaced people, that live there in tents. There are only 3 toilets, 3 latrines for 1,000 people there.
Right.
The IDPs, the internal displaced people, were telling me what they need immediately, but they were also telling me what they need to go back home. There is hope because, for instance, Khartoum was released. So there is hope, eagerness from people to go back home. But at the same time, when I asked them, what do you need to go back home? They were saying, first, we need mine action. We need the unexploded ordnance to be removed because nobody wants to get killed by landmines. They said that we need houses, we need jobs, we need water, sanitation, electricity. And that's why the international community cannot fail. We know that there are ongoing efforts for peace, but it's also important to raise the bar in terms of the funding for the humanitarian aid.
And of course, aid and peace, very much the thrust of this this conference being held in London at the moment. This morning, we talked to Dalia Abdel Monaim. She's a political commentator from Khartoum who fled Sudan with her family 2 years ago. Well, we asked her about the conference happening in London, and I'd like your thoughts on what she told us.
There is a weapons embargo over Darfur, but the weapons keep coming into Sudan via Darfur, through Chad, with the help of the UAE. So tell me, why should I have any expectations for this conference to actually do anything? When, no one has sanctioned the United Arab Emirates, no one has put, pressured the United Arab Emirates to step back from their support. And it's not just the UAE, it's also other countries that are supporting both sides to this war. And this is a war on civilians because we are the ones who have paid the price for this war. It's not the generals, it's not their armies, it's us, the civilians.
Jorge Moreira de Silva from UNOPS. What would you say to people like Dalia who've lost faith in international efforts?
Well, the Secretary General of the United Nations has been very clear, saying that international humanitarian law has been violated in Sudan, that the war rules are not being even fulfilled because even in wars, there are rules that must be fulfilled. But there was also several references about accountability. All members of the UN are accountable on the actions they take. And it's important that we all align with the Security Council resolutions. What we need is not to provide weapons to the war. What we need is to provide food, to provide shelters, to provide water, to provide basic infrastructure. So my answer to what I heard from your interview is that it's important to, rather than fueling or supporting the war, it's important that we support the peace efforts, but also raising ambition in terms of the funding. Let me give you one number that for Deutsche Welle listeners and viewers might be helpful. You know how much money is needed in terms of humanitarian aid for the people in Sudan? $4.2 billion. That's the number from the UN about the needs. You know how much money has been provided? 7%. So clearly we see the immense gap between what is the largest humanitarian crisis and the level of solidarity and generosity being put in place. I think that very often in these conversations, we use excuses from the political bottlenecks, from the lack of willingness to find a deal, to delay action on solidarity. I think that we need both. Right. Because if that's not the standard, why are we supporting Ukraine? Why are we supporting aid in so many countries during war? Because it's important to continue supporting the people even during war. So Sudan cannot be facing somehow a double standard, which is we only support Sudan once we get peace.
So here's the thing. I mean, I'm sure in their hearts, people very much agree with you. But for someone like Dalia, whom we heard from, you seem to be confirming what she said. There is no point in dealing or heeding these international bodies because they are doing very little and they are not even keeping to their own rules. Where is the accountability for the warring sides and for the UAE and others who are fueling this war? You say there's only 7% of what is needed. You're confirming her point that these international bodies are doing next to nothing.
But look, the UN is doing a lot, because if it wouldn't be the United Nations and humanitarians, the suffering of the people would be even worse. But we are the United Nations, which means that it's not the agencies, it's the nations that are part of the United Nations. And what is important is to avoid any sense of impunity. The Secretary General has been mentioning this very often about Gaza, but also about Sudan and about so many conflicts, which is the Security Council resolutions are approved, and it's important to put that in place to guarantee that everyone fulfills the Security Council resolutions. So I cannot comment in any specific country. That's not my role, but I can agree with you and with all that says that it's important that everyone is accountable and all the Security Council resolutions are put in place, but also the Jeddah declaration. So I think it's important that people are a bit tired of declarations, of pages that are being signed. What we need is real action, right. And real action is about stopping the war, but also providing the aid to give hope to the people. I will never forget what I saw in the children's eyes when I visited the center, and they were basically asking for a future. And I know that Sudan is very far from many other countries. I know that the Sudanese are not going to Europe, are not going to the US. They stay in the neighborhood. They are forced displaced internally, but also in the neighborhood. So they are a bit invisible to our reality. But it's the time where we say we will not fail.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jorge Moreira de Silva from the UN Office for Project Services. Thanks for sparing your time.
Thank you.